All right. I assume I can start now. And this is Monique Morrow, and I'm very, very happy to be here for the ethical reboot in extended reality, which I believe is an opportunity. I think when you take a look at what we're going to be talking about in the next couple of, are we ready? Minutes. Yes. All right. One
Yes,
of
you're right.
I can go ahead. So one of the things I wanted to, first of all, thank you very much for presenting here today. I believe this is something that we need to talk about, especially in the terms of what we can do for extended reality and its opportunity. So a few things is that I will be representing some of the viewpoints as the co-chair of the IEEE and Ethics and Autonomous Systems on Extended Reality. When we look at a reboot and a reboot with ethics, we have to think about what the extended reality uh, the modalities, what they look like, and what this means to us. You'll see and hear common what we'll call themes, and the common themes are going to be about this polarity with privacy, this polarity with how do you have inclusivity, how do we deal with new interactions with regards to the whole issues around social interactions, mental health, education, training, the arts, privacy, access, and control. So, and more than anything, we're going to want to take you to a really going for an action, because we think, I do believe that this is an opportunity for you all to participate in what this means when we're talking about ethics and ethics with regard to these technologies. So some of the issues that I will be talking about are social interactions, mental health, education and training, the arts, privacy, access, and control. I'm very, very, very bold. I'm not bold, but I'm very, very, I would say, quite sensitive to what this all means to all of us in terms of actions here. So in terms of social actions, mental health, education and training, the arts, privacy, access and control, we have to look at what all of these contextual issues mean to us with regard to ethics. Recall one thing, that technology has no agency, but if you build and construct technology that in such that you think about ethics and you think about it from the very beginning, especially with these technology sets, this is a great opportunity for all of us. I'm going to talk about a little bit about framing the discussion here, and framing the discussion around extended reality, about what we live between physical worlds and we live what I'll call augmented reality worlds. what does that mean for us in terms of our identity, our time, our agency? Or where does that mean in terms of controlled by interest by perhaps ordinary citizens? But if you think about also what these issues can bring to us, there are certain things that we need to think about in terms of having these central enhancements, implanted devices, or perhaps living in my world, and I enjoy this world, but the stakes could become quite perilous for us. As a committee for this particular group, we have thought about some of these issues, and we are thinking about also some recommendations. For example, in terms of social interactions, a background could be that we interact with society, and perhaps does this interaction, especially in the world that now we're rebooting, does this mean that we will be disengaged? Does it mean that we will actually live in a different world? And I think what we have to do as a team, as a group of individuals and leaders, is to engage social scientists and perhaps humanities and researchers to actually look at what does it mean for product development and ethical concerns that can be identified perhaps earlier. So this is extremely very important when we think about it. When we look also is to think about also if we live in too much of a programmatical world, are we going to lose spontaneity of tradition? Will we lose, for example, the context of serendipity? Will we need to have a serendipity button on? One of my colleagues in the committee actually talked about providing a hotkey, the notion of a universal escape key tutorial. Because if we're thinking about the virtual experience, what does that mean for algorithmic tracking? But not only having a universal key escape key tutorial, but what does that mean for, let's say, joining in augmented reality world? Can we have also some of the notion of onboarding before then and knowing that there is an existence of such a key? But again, serendipity is something that is, or the notion of randomness becomes a very, very important issue. Could you imagine when in a physical world, when you're no longer in a programmatic augmented reality world, could you imagine meeting your partner one day without, just by randomness? And these are the things that we've been talking about in terms of social interaction itself. Mental health, what we're thinking about in the mental health is what we look at is what are the short and long-term effects of these therapeutic experiences and who are engaged. So there is one issue was positive for treatment, for example, of post-traumatic stress. Perhaps also thinking about looking at how those applications can be applied, but we think and believe strongly that there should be guidelines, and guidelines that is very, very inclusive in the industry with mental health care practitioners, along with, for example, the technologists who are creating these sets of augmented reality modalities, where which could actually think about what are the potential of negative, what are the potential of positive, and could, for example, an individual misdiagnose his or her situation without actually having these guidelines in place. So there are recommendations that we believe that could actually be adopted by you and in the industry together. In education and training, we use these sets of technologies, for example, for living in an augmented training world, but they're for training for people who are maybe in the field. However, we believe that you have to think about labor regulations that may not be in place to protect who carry out the extended reality world. What would those regulations look like? How could we protect, for example, the workers who are using these particular technologies? So in those terms, such that there are not deleterious effects on both the human and physical, that are physical and psychological. So a recommendation, for example, is that governments could, for example, consider the need to create a new research based on labor protections. And this is so that there's not, that we can actually assure that's not harmful content to the worker, and in terms of training. So you can see the pattern here that I'm talking about, and that our committee has been recommending, is that we're seeing, as we reboot and come up and reboot for an extended reality world, that the ethics and that the infrastructures that we know and have been living with today are going to change because of this world. In terms of the arts, for example, the issues are going to be quite interesting here. There are certain particular types of art forms that will have an impact, for example, on the creators of content, for example, using these particular technologies, but also how can we assure that that we avoid bias and assure, for example, that there is, this efficacy of algorithmic transparency for when you have machine learning techniques that are being used, so that you can avoid something called what we call artistic suppression. And then the other component here is, what is copyright law going to look like and especially when we're talking about an embedded with physical and virtual environments. How do you remunerate or award an artist for his or her original work using these technologies? So you can imagine, and especially if we talk about what would copyright laws look like, or intellectual property rights. So this is going to be challenging as we come up and reboot in this world with ethics, involved. Privacy and control are going to be very, very interesting, because here we're thinking about the challenges of privacy and identity. What kinds of identities will you be holding? What does the governance model look like in this public and private spaces? And then, of course, I think, when we're thinking about, and my colleagues who have been very, very, very engaged in this space for recommendations, that in ethics, we have to, assure that we have informed consents. What does that mean? That from the very beginning that you have informed consent. It's really incumbent upon the technologists to educate the public on the benefits and the abuses of these technologies. So you can see that there is a polarity, once again, between what is ethics in terms of privacy, in terms of consent, in terms of laws, how they can change, etc. An example of this would be, for example, if you can imagine, if you had just on identity, if you had a photorealistic avatar and you're living in this immersion world, when you have identity management, and perhaps you have something that is a stolen identity. We talked about this as a use case. We actually engage upon this as a use case. What if in this world that an avatar steals perhaps your identity or my identity, commits a crime in this immersive world, and it's a different person, maybe it's yours, and then all of a sudden, commits a crime, and in the physical world, you can actually find out through an identity management system who that individual is. But in an immersive world, it's different. And then how do you get your reputation back? What would the laws look like, for example? These are the types of interactions that we've been talking about in terms of perpetrators of crime. Do you report the crime in this immersive world? But if your identity has been stolen and that has occurred in the immersive world, how do you get your reputation back? What does that mean in terms of new laws, and so on? And these are the types of discussions that we've been talking about in terms of perpetrators of crime, and also what would the laws look like? What would you do? So you can imagine, as we go more and more in these worlds, and because of what's happening, it's experiential. Everything is experiential. We can, absolutely experience, other environments without traveling, but also, in terms of being more and more immersed and thinking about what that could be for new social interaction, new laws, and whether or not we become so disengaged and we lose touch of our humanity. We need to think about all of these very, very big issues. And we have, as an organization, done so. So ethics must be embedded, and you all, as individuals, have an opportunity to partake in this. In our ethical reboot summary, look at the rights of the individual. Look at the foundation when we're thinking about encoding technologies. Look at the rights, for example, about the agency, because technology has no agency. So build it from the very, very beginning. Society has to be a participant in all of this. We have to think about ableists. What happens if you are not, you cannot see, you have your vision impaired, hearing impaired. We have to make sure that there is inclusion for all people here to set the standards in terms of well-being. And we all believe that there can be, as we come out and reboot with ethics and extended reality, that immersive realities are fine, but let us make sure that we reboot now together. We invite you all to download the document, but moreover, not only download the document, read the document, but also be part of this extended reality reboot opportunity for us all. Because in the end, it's not about just living in one world, but thinking about matching our two worlds together and thinking about, those building ethics from the start and speaking about it. So without further ado, thank you very, very much. And I'll stop to also take some questions. So I believe we have one comment, and this is with regard to virtual experience needs social interaction. That is correct. That has always been sort of our assumption here. especially as a group, when we take in consideration the issues about mapping between the augmented worlds that we live in and the physical worlds that we live in. What we want to do is, you know, we are and I think another comment is, where am I speaking from? I'm not sure what the question is. The nature of the question is, I'm speaking I'm actually living in Switzerland. That's the extended question. But I'm not. I don't follow what is meant by where am I speaking from. I live in Switzerland. Hello. Do you think extended reality can contribute to education? Yes, absolutely, it can contribute to education. In fact, we do talk about education as an opportunity, but also in terms of training. We have training on one side when you're talking about job training, but also education can, insofar as you're visiting experiential worlds together. We think that's also an opportunity, but again, it's just to make sure that we are aware of the ethical issues that are involved within. So one question is about the virtual and augmented reality 10 years from now, especially under COVID-19 crisis. Well, this is the interesting thing, because look at how we're talking now. Look at how we can, we're learning now with these sets of technologies, especially augmented reality, which we believe is going to be more enhanced now more than ever before. Certainly this will be part of your everyday life. And we see that as part of our everyday life. If we have to think about whether or not we can be in a physical situation because of a pandemic crisis, but we can use these technologies together to actually have an experiential education and training. But again, I caution, as our committee is cautious, is that think about the ethics that we reboot, that we start from. Because we're going to have different laws. If we talk about 10 years from now, we can imagine laws that may be changing, as I actually pointed out. We can also talk about how maybe what a teacher looks like, what will it mean for a teacher, what will it mean for students. But we have to think about not being so much in a programmatic world that at least we have to have the human contact at some point in time, that we don't become disengaged. And the disengagement is where we have a risk here at the end of the day. One question here is, this is why I stopped earlier, because I want this type of interaction. One question is, what do you think about the bigger difference to population and relation difference between physicist world and a virtual, or I think you mean the physical world and the virtual world. We live, the point here is that we're living in two worlds. We have the opportunity of living as between a physical and virtual world. Do we choose to live in more world than the other, or do we choose, can we balance between the two? And I think that is exactly what we need to reconcile with. And these are, what I would say, the technologies are great. But as so long as we are aware of what the intentions were for the development of the technologies are. So great questions that I love. I love these questions because they're provoking the conversations we need to have. In what field, another question is, what field there is a big and necessary need for such a thing as you can say right now. Thanks and invite. Well, I think the field, well, because we talked about areas around social and mental health, arts, and training. I think that, we can say that The arts are going to be very, very interesting. I think the laws are going to be interesting because, especially for the reasons I've decided, the worlds are blurring at the moment. So you can imagine the thesis here is, are the infrastructures, the social infrastrucures as we know it, sufficient now? That's why we're talking about the reboot and the reboot opportunity. So, you know, all the areas that I've spoken about are going to be very, very, very big. But certainly training, arts, law, privacy, and of course, ethics. Ethics should be part of any education in terms of what we do. I mean, that's the foundation, so that we don't have a cognitive dissonance in the discussions. Another comment is other important area that you think we can apply the extended reality for human development. Absolutely, we could for human development. And so far, what we're talking about human development is making sure that we don't use the humanity in that development. I think that is one area that we probably want to discuss further, because this is going to endanger the conversations that we have when we're talking about rebooting the world. How can AR help people in mental health? Well, it's a great question. Augmented reality. In our committee, we had practitioners in this space. One is we have several areas that have been called out as opportunities. One is for treatment of often leads quote as post-traumatic stress syndrome. The other is, your identities. People were thinking about, how do you see your identity? As are you transgender? Would that be something that people? It's not about there. It's about your identities, your own identities. The other is about being shy, about speeching, about being able to be looking at how you see yourself as in a speech. But there are certainly a lot of things that we have to think of. That people look at these and they've discussed this about identities. The other is about ableism, But it's mental health. I mean, it's just what to be careful. It's a cross spectrum of particular issues, and so the thing that we have to be careful with is that the practitioners and the creators of these technologies come together. That's really the big recommendation. And if for people who want to contact me, you can contact me and directly. I have my email is Monique.Morrow@Cineverse.com, or reach out to me through the IEEE Extended Reality Ethics Committee. Thank you very much. And this is great. It was a short discussion, great comments, great questions, but get involved. We're rebooting the world together. Thank you.